Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andrew Stott and I'm the Emperor of Stomaria. Today I want to address the suggestion that the Kingdom of Wayward is being crushed underfoot by Stomaria.
This is how nations are built and empires are forged. For every nation that becomes integrated into the empire, for every territory that we acquire, for every citizen that joins us, for every drop of water we collect, for every seed that we sow, for every watt of energy we produce, for every silver bar that we stamp, we are securing our future.
So every so often, Stomaria's detractors will often cite an array of reasons as to just why we're so awful. As you might expect, these are touted without a shred of evidence or even some semblance of sound reasoning. And again, as you might expect, we are able to quickly dismantle their points, their reasoning, their rationale, because we do cite evidence and we do use sound reasoning. So for instance, one of the more popular ones in some circles is the suggestion that our social media followings are all fake, especially concerning our YouTube channel. So our subscribers are fake, the watch hours are fake, the views are fake, the comments are fake. None of it is real. Now, YouTube, according to them, has just not picked up on this, and that's why we're able to operate in the way that we are. Now compare that to the reality, where our YouTube channel has been monetized since 2021. Each year, YouTube pays us hundreds of pounds in ad revenue for the videos that we put out to the general public. So I think they probably know a little bit more about the comments, the views, and the watch hours, and the subscribers than all of these people suggesting otherwise. You then have others that like to suggest that Stomaria is some sort of underhanded, shady scam. And the reason for this is that we allow Stomarian citizens and Stomarian supporters to purchase Stomarian merchandise, which they define as overpriced, and that's what makes Stomaria a scam. Now, the issue that they have with this particular little argument is that there are other entities similar to Stomaria in some ways that sell exactly the same merchandise and more besides for, if not the same amount of money, then far more money. But that isn't really flagged up by these people for very obvious reasons. For instance, this might be pretty standard merchandise from Slowjamastan, Westarctica, Ladonia, Flandrensis, or whoever else. Then of course you have the slightly more expensive and bizarre purchases, such as Slowjamastan selling bricks for as much as $100, Atlantium selling copper coins for as much as $150. bits of paper that a whole host of entities define as currency and sell for as much as $50, or even, and I kid you not, war bonds that Molossia sells for their war against East Germany. But naturally, these kinds of inconvenient truths are just ignored by these sorts of people because, like everything else, reality has a tendency to undermine their arguments. And you'll have others still that will claim that the silver that we have acquired and utilized over the years is actually fake, or that we've imported it from dodgy Chinese companies. And the problem with this kind of argument is that not only do we cite very clearly, when asked, where we acquire our silver from, but we also publish this on our website for all to see. And beyond this, it is actually a criminal offence to buy, to trade in, to utilise many of the silver products that we've utilised in the past. For instance, the silver Britannia coins. This is considered legal tender in the UK. And if you are seen to be handling fake Britannias, again, that is a criminal offence. So it's not very likely that we would have engaged in that sort of activity, don't you think? And in and amongst all of this nonsense, you have the added suggestion that Stomaria is somehow oppressing its member states, that we are crushing them underfoot. We are forcing them to engage in activities against their will. We are extracting the wealth from these member states for our own ends, or that we are simply riding on the coattails of our member states without providing anything to the wider empire. And they'll mix and match these kind of arguments depending on which lie they wish to peddle at any given time. Now, for reasons that are quite honestly unknown to me, the Kingdom of Wayward is often touted as one of the most oppressed member states of the Empire. And I thought it would be a very fun video to make, to go through the history of Wayward and Stomaria's relationship and what the reality is concerning that relationship. So, it's history time. Now, the Kingdom of Wayward is actually older than Stomaria by about a month. So Wayward was founded in May 2019 and Stomaria was founded in June 2019. When I first came across Wayward, I actually reached out to them in order to organise a visit. Now, I actually did this in July 2019, a little over a month after we were founded. And once we were there, we concluded our first trade agreement, in which silver from Stomaria was exchanged for blue eggs from Wayward. When I went back to Wayward about a month later, I actually brought some gifts, and I presented these gifts to King Raoul. The first one was their first ever physical flag. At that point, they still didn't have a physical flag, and I thought it was high time that they got one. And alongside this flag, I presented to King Raoul several dozen button badges, which were then distributed to many of the Waywardian citizens. And in return, I was actually provided with some gifts. Specifically, I was provided with some preserves, some jams that were supplied from a local Waywardian. A few days later, we actually publicly announced a declaration of friendship between Stomaria and Wayward. And these declarations of friendships were our way of saying that this is a nation, this is a community that we are actually building a real world relationship with. And for 2 years, that was the status quo. Wayward was an external ally of Stomaria. We did engage in small-scale trade, and I visited Wayward many dozens of times during this period. We had built up a personal relationship with the Waywardian community, and I got to know many Waywardians on a personal level, not least King Raoul himself, who I considered, even as far back as 2021, to be one of my closest friends. Now, from the outset, Stomaria and Wayward, even though they had similar goals, were taking different approaches, and this was very clear from the outset, and was down entirely to circumstance. When Stomaria was first founded, it was just myself and my wife, Empress Samantha. Even little Princess Eleanor of Stomaria wasn't born yet, and wouldn't be for another year. And it wasn't until after our 1-year anniversary that we allowed our supporters to become citizens, and even then they had to go through a relatively rigorous application process. And during that first year, we were focused entirely on developing Stomaria's values and objectives, its structure, how it was going to work, and how we were going to accomplish the goals that we had set ourselves. We wanted to be sure we knew what we were doing and how we were going to go about doing it. That was the founding history of Stomaria. It was about trying to figure out what we were trying to do and then working our way up to actually doing it. We weren't rushing in guns blazing. We didn't have land, we didn't have citizens. It was just the imperial family, and we were focused entirely on developing Stomaria without expanding Stomaria by involving other people and territorial possessions. When Wayward was founded, the circumstances couldn't have been more different. Even though King Raoul was not a king and Wayward as an idea didn't really exist, the land had already been purchased and was being utilised by a community. Raoul was the head of that community. And when they became Wayward, when the Kingdom of Wayward was actually founded, they had to improvise to some extent. They had to develop relatively quickly, and they had to develop on the go. Now, like in Stomaria, Wayward did have its ups and it did have its downs, but it's very fair to say that the downs at Wayward were far more severe than they were in Stomaria for a very simple reason. Where there are people, there are politics, and where there are politics, there are problems. Over the years, I saw a lot of people come and go. A lot of die-hard, steadfast Waywoodians, which I thought would stand the test of time. Even they eventually decided that it wasn't for them anymore, or they would be pulled away, or drifted away, or whatever else. And it was incredibly sad to see this boots-on-the-ground community that was so vibrant and so colourful to be eventually just boiled back down to King Raoul himself. Now, don't get me wrong, there have been plenty of Waywoodians that have stood the test of time, steadfastly supporting King Raoul in whichever way they can. But in terms of people, a community, being present at this woodland on a semi-regular, near-permanent basis, that was just a shell of what it once was back when I first found Wayward. By the time it got to the end of 2021, as I say, it had died a very slow death. And it was just incredibly sad for me to see, not only because of what the community had been and the potential that there was in order to develop it further, but because, as I say, King Raoul at that point was already considered by me to be a very close personal friend. And because he was going through a hard time, a bit of a rough patch to say the least, I just wanted to be there as often as I could. And I did travel down to the woodlands as much as I could in order to check upon him and make sure he was all right. Now, the reasons for this disintegration of Wayward during this time period, I do know, broadly speaking, what these reasons are, but because I don't pretend to know all the finer details, and it's not really relevant to the story here, I'm not going to get into all that. But on one of the trips down to Wayward to check up on King Raoul, make sure he was all right, he did actually broach the subject to me about what it would mean for Wayward to become a part of the Empire of Stomaria. And we did discuss this for a little while, but he was very keen on the idea, I think. The idea that we could build something greater together, that Wayward could potentially benefit from becoming a part of a larger network, someone like myself who was perhaps more dedicated than other people that he had come into contact with in the past, about trying to bring this about, even if it is through a different nation, a different community. And so as I say, the idea was suggested that Wayward be integrated into the Empire of Stomaria. Now, I did have some initial reservations about this, because even though I didn't have an issue with King Raoul on any level, in any shape or form, he was not the only Waywoodian that needed to convince him of this. And at that time in particular, I was not inclined to cause a rift unnecessarily within the Waywoodian community itself. I didn't want to see it fracture and splinter further and faster. And so for that reason, I was initially slightly reluctant to pursue this change in our relationship. But King Raoul did put my mind at ease on that front. He did say that it wasn't going to be a major issue, and that's the decision that he wanted to make, which was to have Wayward integrated into the Empire, was something that he would pursue regardless. So with those kind of concerns put to one side, Wayward actually became the first associated state of the empire, something that we would later simply define as a member state, in September 2021. Now, as I'm sure most of the people watching this video will already know, even those that knowingly suggest otherwise, Stomaria has virtually no involvement whatsoever in the domestic affairs of its member states. There are certain things that we do insist on: the recognition of a common head of state, a common foreign policy, a common monetary system, and so on and so forth. This is to make sure that from the outside looking in, we are presented as a unified front. But in terms of the domestic affairs and domestic policies and the internal developments and the progress and the structures of each member state, they're left to their own devices. And nothing highlights this more to me than some of the conversations that I have with King Raoul, when he will explain to me that some Waywoodian citizens or supporters, people that have known about Wayward for some time, will approach him and actually ask him about what the empire is, that they've just come across the Stomarian Empire or the Empire of Stomaria, and that Wayward is a part of it. What's that about? And this is a very clear indication to me that what we are doing is quite right, in that we do not have a policy of enforcement or encroachment. Everyone that associates with the Empire of Stomaria does so on a voluntary basis. Every citizen of the Stomarian Empire is voluntarily associating either with Stomaria directly or with each member state. We are not forcing people to engage with us. They are all doing so because they want to, because there is a voluntary association and a voluntary affiliation to it. We have no enforcement mechanism that we can use to compel people to engage in anything that they do not want to engage in. And this includes forcing member states into a position where we will demand something of them and they will be forced to comply. That just does not exist in any realm of reality that we have when talking about the nations and the communities that we are building. And this goes double for the forceful extraction of wealth from these communities and from these nations. What do they think that Stomaria is doing exactly? That we are somehow enslaving the citizens of each member state to work in the mines or something? I mean, I honestly can't fathom as to what the mindset is of the people that suggest these sorts of things. Stomaria has engaged with Wayward and the other member states of the Empire, again, on an entirely voluntary basis. These trade agreements that we have, these gifts that we exchange, this is not done through coercion or force. This is done through voluntary decision. And the idea that we would have extracted something without providing something in return is absolutely ludicrous. For every product, for every service that has been acquired or provided by Wayward, we have compensated them for in some form or another. And if we haven't, it's because it was a gift of some description. A good example of this would be any number of the gifts that Wayward had bestowed upon little Princess Eleanor, not least when she was first born. The only real exception to this is, funnily enough, Princess Eleanor herself, when she recently visited the Kingdom of Wayward for one of the end-of-the-month gatherings, and during the harvesting of some Waywoodian produce, she tested some of that produce in the form of nibbling on some blackberries. But as I say, this is not the extraction of wealth from Wayward that you might expect, and certainly not on the scale that some are suggesting. More to the point, we have always sought to support Wayward in whichever way we could. And this isn't just through the previously mentioned physical flag or badges, or even the direct financial contributions that we've made in the past in order to support Wayward. But this is far more fundamental than that. It might be the promotion of Wayward through our various social media accounts, but it could also be us sending King Raoul on a beekeeping course in order to learn how to keep bees, providing Wayward with their first hive, organising the tree surgeons to attempt to take down some pine trees, which in fairness was unsuccessful, but the intention was there and works were undertaken, or Stomaria purchasing some hens from the original flock that Wayward had in order to have them raised there. And the list goes on and on and on. And this is not a one-way street. Wayward has supplied Stomaria with various gifts and tries to assist us in various ways as well. And this is something that we also try to highlight as frequently as we can. But all of this pales in comparison to the fact that we actually purchased one of the two plots of land that actually made up the Kingdom of Wayward. And that's when it became Wayward South and Southward under Wayward and Stomaria respectively. And in doing so, we injected a huge amount of revenue into Wayward, while also allowing them to continue to utilize the land that we had just purchased, not just through access to Wayward South, which they require, but also to actually utilize Southward, Stomarian territory itself. They use it for parking, they use it for the memorial garden, they use it for a children's play area, they use it for storage. It's used in many different ways, and I allow this gladly because I consider King Raoul to be a very good friend of mine. I consider Wayward to be an integral part of the Empire. Together, we can accomplish so much more, and I am more than pleased to be able to supply them with as much support as I can, while also advancing Stomaria's goals. And that is what the Empire is all about. The Empire is about mutual prosperity and mutual cooperation. There is no force, there is no coercion, there is no boogeyman hiding on the sidelines, there's no hitman ready to go if you step out of line. Everything that we are doing is based on voluntary association and voluntary affiliation because there is mutual benefit to be had. And once this plot of land had been purchased, once Southward had become a Stomarian province, we went to work on it. We landscaped this territory in a very significant way. There were a lot of works taking place. We moved tons and tons of soil around. Dozens of stumps were pulled up. A lot of work went into this, with both Stomaria and Wayward helping to reshape this woodland. Now, once that was accomplished, I made a point of building up this province myself, in the sense that I established a shed base. I built the shed. I erected the new fencing. I established the raised beds. I poured in the soil. I poured in the compost. I turned it over. I planted the seeds. I watched them grow. I established the water butts and the guttering on the shed to collect the water in which we would use to actually water our new produce. I wanted to make the point very, very clear. This was a Stomarian province. The produce grown was Stomarian, start to finish. And this wasn't to, in any way, dismiss Wayward, but I wanted to make the point clear that Stomaria itself is a nation. Stomaria itself is a community. And we have gone on to produce not just the produce at Southward, but much beyond that. We have eggs, chickens, ducks, even hives and honey being produced elsewhere, as well as various orchards where apples, pears and plums are being grown as I speak. And all of this produce is Stomarian. They are being taken, they are being extracted by Stomarian citizens, members even of the imperial family. They are as Stomarian as it gets. Indeed, as far as I'm aware, Stomaria is actually producing and utilising more agricultural goods than any member state of the Empire. And beyond this, Stomaria also provides a unique medium of exchange, the silver Stomarian stater, with stater coins having been in circulation since 2021, and the stater bar having been in circulation since the opening months of 2023, all of which are made from pure 999 fine silver. Member states not only feature on these staters, but they also have the opportunity to acquire them based exclusively on the spot price of silver at the expense of Stomaria itself. This makes the acquisition of staters through trade, commerce and enterprise one of the most cost-effective ways to acquire silver in the world, with the Waywoodian community already being the largest holders of staters outside of Stomaria itself, and as such, they are the greatest beneficiaries of this monetary system. So just like the suggestions that member states are being oppressed or are being taken advantage of, the suggestion that Stomaria doesn't bring anything to the table and relies on Wayward or other member states of the Empire to prop it up is, would you believe it, a lie. We have our own citizens. We have our own land. We have our own industries. We have our own money. And we have our own identity, just as every member state of the Empire does, with the actual purpose of the Empire being plain to see. So to summarise, the Empire of Stomaria is an empire of trade, commerce and enterprise. We are not built on force or coercion. We are built on voluntary association and voluntary affiliation, where communities and nations have come together because they seek mutual cooperation, mutual prosperity, and they want to be able to accomplish their goals far faster as a single united entity, rather than trying to pursue their goals as an individual entity without the support network around them. That is it. That is the Empire. So if you wanted to show your support for Stomaria and indeed the wider Empire, then please feel free to give this video a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll catch you in the next one.